Hey guys, Freddy here. Welcome back to another Retro RPG. The end of another week, the end of another poll. We've got a very definite win for Dwarfs, Stone and Steel for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Now we'll cover this on the desktop in a wee second, and as usual I'll be back at the end of the video with some other channel related stuff and some other poll related stuff. But before I do that, I'd like to take a moment to talk about my Patreons, who this week I've been told know all about surviving in a world of grim and perilous adventure. Now these are wonderful people who help support the channel and make all of this happen, so I'd like to thank them from the absolute bottom of my heart. Their efforts are so much appreciated. Now if you'd like to join them and help support the channel, or you'd like to see these videos a week early, or you'd like to see some Patreon exclusive videos we put up over there, or one of the other levels of patronage, then there's a Patreon in the description down below. If you check it out, it'd be very much appreciated. But anyway, let's have a look at Dwarfs, Stone and Steel. So, this is Dwarfs, Stone and Steel. It's a supplement for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, came out from Hogshead Publishing in 2002. And, as appears fairly obvious, it's a book about dwarfs. Like the complete book of dwarves, elves and all that for Dungeons & Dragons, they were doing this to flesh out the races and give you a lot more background information. In this, it's fairly successful. It does a lot of heavy lifting, there's a lot of stuff in here to like. It's a very, very good book. Although it does seem like a bunch of this was lifted from the codexes. Now, Warhammer Fantasy Battle obviously had been carrying on the history. Fantasy Roleplay had come out during 2nd edition, and by this point you were probably up to about 5th edition Warhammer Fantasy Battle. And the world had changed and evolved. But they'd written all these codices for the different armies, including dwarves. And I think a lot of this is lifted out of there, so it doesn't completely match the world. But it does a lot of great work in bringing Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay back into line with where Warhammer Fantasy Battle had gone. So if you were a fan of the war game and you wanted to play a tabletop role-playing game, this was bringing Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay back up to date. So it can only be commended for that. Now, first of all, absolutely love the cover. I've seen people online complaining that it looks just like a battle, but in a book about dwarves, you don't want other races on it, and this looks like a bunch of adventurers. They're trying to get in a door, they're being attacked by goblins. What's not to love about that? On the back cover, going underground. Everything you need to play or referee dwarfs in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Once dwarfs were rulers of the mightiest empire in the old world. Now, after 4,000 years of war, their great underground fortresses are under attack or have fallen to orcs, goblins, skaven, and the hordes of chaos. But with their advanced weapons and steam technology, their knowledge of runic magic and their love of a good fight, the dwarfs are striking back. They will free their homes from the greenskins, rescue the great weapons of legend, and make the ancestor gods proud, or they will die trying. Because for the dwarfs, a life without honour and glory is not a life worth living. Book contains all information that Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay players and GMs need to make exciting dwarf characters and set adventures in Dwarflands, including expanded character creation rules with new skills and 18 new careers such as miners, lore masters and dragon slayers, information on runes, runic magic and powerful rune weapons, dwarf technology from guns and cannons to gyrocopters and ironclads, dwarf holds in the World's Edge Mountains, the Black Mountains and Norsca, a gazetteer of dwarf realms, a history and timeline of the dwarfs, dwarf religion including new gods and much more. Inside, well, the presentation is absolutely lovely. I do love that Hogshead's website was still on a subdomain of their internet provider. Anyway, license from Games Workshop, so everything had to go via Games Workshop. Big credits page, we see lots of names we recognise here: Graham Davis, James Wallace, so many others. Lots and lots of talent here. Interior art, John Blanche, Mark Gibbons, John Hodgson, Ralph Horsley, it's so many others. Really, really good stuff. Contents page, and we go straight into the history of the dwarf race. So it's talking about how they were created, the time of the ancestor gods, coming of chaos, the grand alliance between the elves and the dwarves, golden age when they traded between them, but then the age of wars as they fell out. As I said, the artwork is absolutely glorious. This looks like the cover to a book. Great stuff. The Goblin Wars, the Dwarf Schism, talking about the way their alliance broke down, the alliance with Sigmar's empire, why the dwarves are very happy to work with the Empire, the Age of Heroes, the Dwarf Realms today. So going through all their history. We've got Dwarf Society next. So it talks about social values, age, wealth, skill, reputation, tradition, the social structure, clan and family, the stages of life going from infancy, youth, adulthood, and then you become full beards, long beards, elders, and if you live for around 200 years, which is the maximum length of life, if you exceed that, you become a great beard. Rare dwarves who exceed 400 years become living ancestors. There's death and burial dealt with. Dwarf women. Now, this is an interesting thing. I'm not sure it's balanced as much as I like, but it points out that there are 4 dwarf males to every 1 female, I believe. It could be 3 for every 1. But there's far more males. But dwarf women live longer because they tend to be a bit more protected, because you don't want your species to go extinct because all the women have died. But they naturally live longer anyway, which means they are responsible for teaching the next generation. So while a lot of dwarf heroes are male, the people who are raising the next generation and teaching them all their skills tend to be the women, so they are very, very respected. And it mentions that dwarves look upon relationships very, very different as well. Because if they looked at it like humans, where everybody's fighting to have a mate, there would be slaughters within dwarf civilization. So the dwarves don't tend to look at women as a prize. They look at them as the people who will teach the next generation. Anyway, we've got a section on dwarf anatomy, diet, they eat meat. Of course, there's dwarf bread, which can last for ages, ale, which is a meal in itself. Section on reproduction, the craft guilds, so there's armourers and weaponsmiths, artisans, brewers, engineers, farmers and herders, healers, jewelsmiths, metalsmiths, miners, rune scribes, runesmiths, stonemasons, warriors, and you can swap between craft guilds. A big list of careers. Now, I don't really like the background of crumpled paper. It makes this a little hard to read. But it's not terrible. You can make it out if you squint a little. Life outside the guilds and noble clans, the clergy, lawmasters, the slayers. Dishonoured dwarves become slayers, where they give up their life and they go out to find the biggest thing to kill them. Of course, they fight their hardest, and if they go up through being a troll slayer, there'll be a giant slayer, up to dragon slayers and demon slayers. It points out that there's expatriate dwarfs. Not all dwarves live within the dwarf kingdoms. Lots of them live in human cities. It talks about that quite a bit. Although, since they're the dwarves which are most likely to play, it does feel a bit light on that. But it gives you a chunk of information on how they are brought up, and later on we get information about how dwarf settlements within human settlements work. A calendar, dwarf friends and grudges, talking that the dwarves actually aren't that hating of the elves. Because the dwarves won the last war against the elves, they see that as all the grudges are done, we won. But there's obviously these fresh grudges which can crop up. We've got the greenskins, the tainted or the chaos dwarves. Then we're on to a section about dwarf holds. It goes through the different dwarf kingdoms, their different settlements. Some very nice images here. While this looks a bit more primitive, like early Dungeons and Dragons, I really find it an evocative image, especially as we create a map of that later. And some of the other artwork, as I said, is absolutely glorious. We've got a map of the Empire and the World's Edge Mountains with the locations of the different dwarf cities, which ones are broken and which ones remain. We've got a map of the surface citadel for Karak 8 Peaks. Karak 8 Peaks, the occupied lower holds, showing which areas are there. Merchants' Quarter, residences, foundries, the Great Hall, etc. Another map showing the border princes, going through lots and lots of settlements, the lost holds, so all the places which have fallen, legendary settlements. There we go to the expatriate dwarves. As I said, it sort of details out, how many dwarves are in Outdwarf. According to a census, there are 1,100 dwarves. It talks about how they are organized. The Guild Horde of the Dwarf Engineers Guild, the largest of the Empire, is located near the Imperial Engineers School. Many experimental weapons used by the Imperial Army are the work of dwarf engineers. Medenheim, Null, lesser settlements, Marienburg and the Wasteland, Bretonia. Talks about Kislev. Bretonia, because it's closer to the elves, the dwarves don't tend to have much doings in Bretonia. You don't get many settled there. But in Kislev, where the Kislevites hated the dwarves to start off with, during one of the many chaos attacks, the dwarves came to their rescue, so they are more than happy, and the dwarves helped rebuild afterwards. Tylea, we've got the Norse dwarfs, how they were cut off, and their different settlements. We've got a story, the Doom of Khazad Grund, along with a large illustration showing what happens. Sven Bristlingbeard holds the axe bridge for 4 hours. Then we're on to dwarf technology. So the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay version of Mithril is Gromril. So it talks through the armour that dwarves will make it for themselves. They would, in theory, make it for a dwarf friend who'd earned it, but that has never happened to yet. But Gromril weapons end up in the hands of other races, whereas the armour just wouldn't fit anybody else. We've got light and medium weapons, so bombards, fire throwers, different types of handguns, mortars, swivel guns, volley guns, heavy weapons, breaker cannons, field cannons, flame cannons, with all the stats for them, organ guns, thunder cannons, torpedoes. Then we're on to gyrocopters, so this is definitely into Warhammer Fantasy battle territory, but can be kind of cool if you want to have your dwarves be a bit steampunk. We've got dwarf shipping. Gunboats, monitors, ironclads, dreadnoughts, their earth borer mining drill. Then we're on to the section on magic. Now, dwarves can be wizards. There's nothing to stop them. But most of their magic will be runic magic. And this is very interesting, the way they've adapted this. So, you would think that it's cutting runes onto items and getting them magical. But as we go through, we've got rune weapons of renown here, learning master runes and all that. All these magical items, and then we come on to the runes. And while you can etch this onto an item to get the ability permanently imbued, this can be also etched as a temporary rune. So a rune of light, you can etch it onto a stone or something, and it will have the equivalent light for 1d6 turns, and never be brighter than a candle. So it uses up some magic points, it's a level 1 spell basically, but rather than just casting a light spell, you're putting it onto a stone or whatever. And we've got various items, runes of warmth, purification, rune of reloading, runes of silence. Here we've got an image of all the different runes. Dwarf wizards and alchemists, talking about those. Then we're on to the dwarf religions. So we've got Grungi. I kind of skipped past his name there. Grungi, Valea, Grimnir, the god of warriors, Gazgul, the lord of the Underearth, Shaper of Thugni, the god of runesmiths, Morgrim, the god of engineers. We've got ancestor cults, because they do value their ancestors so much. We've got various random things you can roll, so if you want to create a random dwarf name, we've got male forenames and female forenames. Talking about surnames. Talking about nicknames. How dwarves will often have a nickname that's used more commonly than their name. So Snorri Burnthom instead of Snorri Bardenson, commemorating the time that as an apprentice, young Snorri absently-mindedly picked up a brooch blank that was still hot, and he burnt his thumb. So dwarves, knowing that they will pick up nicknames through their life for anything embarrassing they do, tend to be more considered. They're very considerate of their actions to not do something stupid and embarrassing. Places of birth, so we can roll randomly on the career tables, where they're born, whether it's in the border princes areas or Kislev or whatever. Different dwarf settlements, so you can roll up exactly where within the Empire one was worn. We've got basic careers, a couple here which can be used by anybody, so a farmer and a miner. But we've got dwarf-only ones, rune scribes, warrior ones, alchemists, load finders, lore masters, master artisans, master engineers, which we'll come back to in a second, because I'm not sure these were thought out. Mountaineers, pilots, runesmiths, and shipmasters. Now, the shipmasters are the members of the Dwarf Engineers Guild who specialise in the construction, maintenance and operation of dwarf gunboat, warship or submersibles. We can see their skills there. But if we flip back to the Master Engineer, we can see that he has boat building, which the Shipmaster, who's an expert in building ships, doesn't have. Not quite sure why that. But carrying on, we've got the Dragon Slayers there, we've got the Demon Slayers, Stone Shapers, Templars, Veteran Warriors, Witch Hunters, a bunch of new skills, agriculture, air law, etc. Further details, how to roleplay dwarves. And then we've got a section on NPC dwarves, so dwarves of renown. The High King of Karak, the heir to the kingship of Karak-Ungol. Various ones, none of them I particularly recognise. Joseph Bugman does seem familiar because of Bugman's Rangers, but that might have come later. We've got the runic script, so what the dwarf language means. We've got different symbols for that. A few pages of them, including gods' names, different dwarf holds, etc. Khazalid letters, their numbers, a timeline of the dwarves, going right up through their entire history, a gazetteer of the dwarf realms, so briefly giving you information about the different places, and that's it. Now there's a lot to like in there. It's a very handy book, and I love the way it fleshes out the dwarves, giving them their own tone. They're not just short humans, they've got all this extra stuff they can do. I would have loved it if Hogshead had done the elves, the halflings, all the other playable races, to flesh those out too, and bring in stuff from Warhammer Fantasy Battle into Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay and update the system. I can only guess that they've done that with the later releases as newer companies have taken over and gone on with stuff, that they haven't stuck with the original setting, and they are bringing across all this wonderful, wonderful stuff. So, that was Dwarf, Stone and Steel. And that won the poll this week with a very confident 38% of the vote, to full 10% ahead of the second place, which was Secrets of Shadowloo for the Street Fighter RPG, which came in on 28%. And at the start of the poll, it was winning, and I thought, finally we were going to get a chance to have a look at some Street Fighter stuff. But alas, not this time. Perhaps next time. I'll keep putting them in until eventually they do win, which is going to be a bit of a theme in this commentary. Because in third place was The Adept's Way for Earthdawn, which came in on 23%, and again, Earthdawn's one of my favourite RPGs. I would love to cover that, but not this time, so it'll go in the future. And finally, on only 11% was Terra Counter Terra for Millennium's End. And that, again, is an absolute favourite of mine. The quality of work they put into this RPG is so good, and I really want to share it with you, but it never wins polls. Alas, not this time either, so I guess it'll keep going in until eventually it does win. Now, all of those are worked out, and we're going over to a retro adventure poll. And first up, we've got Last Rites for Call of Cthulhu, which came out from Chaosium in 1999. Now, this is a Cthulhu Now, a modern day adventure, and we've looked through a few of these in the past, and they have all been worthwhile, been very, very good stuff, and I see no reason why this shouldn't follow pace. So, after that, we've got Mission to Liana for the Star Wars role-playing game from West End Games, and it came out in 1992. And Star Wars, an absolute soft spot for me. I love covering it. Obviously, I run RPG Gamer, which is Star Wars stuff. I've been running it for over 20 years. And this seems like a very interesting adventure where the players have to go after the Imperials who have created a cloaking device for their large ships. So, it'd be very interesting to look into what's in that. And third, we've got Second Seal of Repulsion for Mutant Chronicles, came out from Target Games in 1996. Now, this is the start of a campaign. Now, it's been so long since I've covered any Mutant Chronicles stuff, and it's a very fun game, very much Doom the role-playing game. Aliens and demons coming in from another universe, being fought off by big guys with big guns. Amazingly fun, amazingly cool role-playing game. Alas, very rarely shows up in these polls. We shall see if it does this time. And finally, we've got A View to a Kill for the James Bond 007 RPG. Came out from Victory Games in 1985. Now, we cover the James Bond 007 RPG. We've covered Dr. No in the past. It'd be fascinating to cover some of the other adventures based on movies. There were a lot of fun what we've looked at in the past, but we shall see what happens next. Now, what else have I been up to? Well, over on DrivethruRPG, I've been releasing booklets. As usual, they're linked to in the description down below. This time, it's been fairy tale classes. And if you're interested in those, you can check them out over on DrivethruRPG. Or, if you join the Patreon, which is also linked to in the description down below, on Lord or Librarian status, you get access to all of my writings, which is way over 200-300 booklets now, on a shared Google Drive. So if you want to check out some of that, then check out the Patreon. And over on RPG Gamer, I have finally finished covering Andor. It was a great run, but now I'm going over to the Tales of the Underworld series, which I didn't enjoy so much, but we'll get through that, and then we'll be going back to the Legacy comics. And eventually, once all of those are out of the way, we're going to be going back to Young Jedi Adventures. It's so great that there's so much Star Wars out there to be covered on the site, to be statted out, to be reviewed, that I've got this big queue of stuff to do, of just new content. And I believe there's more stuff coming out very soon, isn't there? Vision Season 3. So before I even get through everything that already is queued up, there'll be more getting added to it. Great stuff. But anyway, as usual, I've been wittering on for quite long enough. So thank you very much for watching. But as always, most of all, you look after yourselves, and I'll catch you later. Bye now.